This is the Final Word Cricket podcast with Adam Collins, and welcome to the January instalment of a book club. I realise we haven't done a book club in a couple of months because of the Ashes, but there'll be one coming roughly every month of 2026. And who better to start with than Pat Rodgers, who is such a prolific author on the golden age of cricket, so the period that leads up to World War One. And he's been busy at it again last year, writing about Syd Emery, who was an Australian leg spinner who played just before World War One. He played 4 test matches on the triangular series in 1912 in England, so a couple against England, a couple against South Africa, but a fascinating story about a man who started his life in a place called McDonaldtown, which is now known as Erskineville in inner Sydney, and vaulted his way into national calculations following a brilliant start for New South Wales. But his career finished virtually as soon as it started, as far as Australia is concerned. And by the time World War One broke out, he was virtually done as well, as far as playing cricket was concerned. And the story of his life more generally, though, is one that's worth taking in, and one that has been worth investing in by Pat Rodgers, who's, again, such a great author on this particular period. He studied it for years, and there's nobody better to take us through the story of a man who was erratic on the field, erratic off the field, and the erratic Syd Emery is an appropriate title for this book. As always, our program is brought to you by Morris Blackburn Lawyers, Australia's #1 plaintiff law firm. We're proud of the stories that we can tell you about them. They've been in operation since 1919. Take Jennifer, who at age 72 found herself flourishing in the golden years of her retirement. She was walking 10 kilometres a day as part of an active lifestyle, but that was stripped away from her when she was diagnosed with mesothelioma. During the 1980s, Jennifer was employed at a local tavern in Launceston, Tasmania. For about 6 months, she walked past the construction site of an adjoining drive-through bottle shop owned by that local tavern. But unbeknownst to her, the construction site was contaminated with asbestos dust and fibre due to the disturbance of asbestos-containing materials. So what happened from there is Morris Blackburn's team helped Jennifer pursue a claim for compensation lodged with the Asbestos Compensation Commissioner on the basis that her condition was reasonably attributable to her exposure to asbestos during the course of her employment in Tasmania. And while Jennifer's compensation won't restore her health, it will provide her and her family with some financial security. So by sharing her journey, Jennifer hopes to educate others and encourage them to take steps to protect themselves and their loved ones from asbestos-related illnesses, and to seek legal advice in the unfortunate event that asbestos-related diagnoses are made. So Morris Blackburn Lawyers do so much of their work on a no-win, no-fee basis. And as I mentioned before, they've been in operation since 1919, and they're proud partners of the Final Word, season 19 of it. They were our principal partner in season 18 as well. Before going to the interview with Pat Rodgers, I also want to put my boot to the screen if you're watching on YouTube. Yes, you might have thought that my days of doing this were done given we returned from the Ashes, but no, they have not. Big Boots UK, these are the mongrel riding boots. They have gotten me all the way across Australia. I wore them every single day. You might imagine that I've worn out the proverbial leather of these, but far from it. They're in terrific nick. You would barely know that I've worn them for about 40 days straight or whatever it works out to be with all of my various commitments in Australia. They look sensational. They're a great bit of kit, and that is all part of the Big Boots UK distribution network. So what you're getting here is Australian boots based in the UK, at a fraction of the price when you compare it to, like, for those who saw me put that boot up right now, they might think they look like another boot, wink, wink, not nudge, nudge, but these don't come at anywhere near that cost. And because you're friends with us, you get that 10% discount, which is built into the link in the show notes. Big Boots UK, fantastic people. Ryan running that operation. He helps sponsor Northamptonshire County Cricket Club as well. So they're a family-owned business who are invested in cricket, and it's great to have had their support throughout the course of the Ashes and through the remainder of season 19 as well. Big Boots UK, great to have them with us on The Final Word. All right, enjoy the next hour or so. Pat Rodgers has been such a great supporter of us in other ways as well. He's part of our Nerd Pledge Sleuth group that helps solve so many of those storytime poses that you hear on our weekend program. And he's been a co-host of the show with Jeff and me before in that capacity when we met in Sydney last year. But he's back today talking about his excellent new book, The Erratic Syd Emery. Enjoy this. It's a really nourishing conversation about a fascinating time in cricket history. Yes, so per the intro, I got Pat Rodgers with me talking about this fantastic book, The Erratic, Syd Emery, which I'm showing to the screen now if you're watching on YouTube. From McDonaldtown to Lords, the forward by Greg Chappell. It's a book about a golden age by someone with an enormous interest in the golden age of cricket. Of course, Pat, who I welcome here, has written a book about the 1912 tour, the Triangular Series, Australia's trip there, cricket before World War One in New South Wales as well. So it's only right that someone who's had such an interest in this time in cricket history has written about one of the most fascinating characters from it. Good morning to you, or good evening to you, sorry, where you are at the moment in Brisbane, Pat.
Good evening, Adam. Thanks very much for having me. It's a huge pleasure to be able to talk about Syd to a nice audience.
So just place where you are at the moment, if predictably with you, you're on a cricket tour.
Yeah, so school cricket, I've coached schoolboy cricket for over 30 years, well over 30 years now since I've started teaching. It's been a big part of my life, as well as history teaching, to also coach sport, particularly cricket. So we're up here with a big carnival at Nudgee College in Brisbane. They're hosting us. We've got a touring party of 13 and a few staff. We've got 4 games in 5 days. It's the Australasian Schools Cricket Competition. There's 20 teams up here. There's 10 in our first division. So we're at the end of the second day here. It's hot and humid in Brisbane, and boys are very tired, but we've had one win, one loss. So a good start.
I feel obliged to ask you, out of all the schoolboys, that who's the Test cricketer? What's the name from one of the teams around the traps who's going to make it?
I've coached Lockie Hearn, who's he was at the school I'm at now at Pius, and he was also at Joey's before that. So he's doing pretty well for Queensland. He's been in the heat in this BBL season. Um, in combined teams or in grade teams that I've coached, under 21s, the Menenti brothers, Liam
Yeah.
Scott, have come through with my own son Matt. Yeah, it's been a pleasure to see them come all the way through now. And there's one boy who I'm very proud of. He's only 21, 22, Joe Colgan, who's in Mossman first grade at the moment. He's captained them a couple of times this year in Sydney grade cricket, and he's got 8 scores over 50 in his last 8 innings. He's
Wow.
averaging over 100 in Sydney first grade. So we're very proud of Joe. He's very humble, a very good cricketer. So keep him on your radar,
Brilliant.
Joe Colgan.
Brilliant. Love it. Remember the name. The
Yeah.
last time we saw each other was at a Chinese restaurant in Sydney last week. But before that was when we were when I was able to drop into your Sydney historians lunch. I mean, the great
Yes.
work that you and your crew do, and so prolific in the books that you write. It feels like there is a concentration on the golden age. Can you just talk us through when this became a big part of your life, and why you continue to churn out such excellent books about the era?
I suppose only fairly recently. So, I'm full-time teaching. This is a hobby for me, really, a bit of a side hustle. And the golden age has fascinated me for a while, but particularly concentrated in the last 5 or 6 years since I've started writing books. Been articles in the past in various cricket journals, but the golden age, I suppose, brings up characters that are very different from today's cricketers. They've got many layers to them. They're very different. You don't need to peel back too far to find some fascinating sort of personalities there who have got backstories to their cricket, which really gives them a colourful sort of feel. And that's what I've enjoyed researching and finding out about. Some of the less known ones, and then some of the other ones too, who, yeah, they're just incredibly interesting characters to me, and a lot of guys who are in that cricket scribes group that you're referring to there the other day. We've uncovered some really good stories that, from over 100 years ago now, the golden age. The golden age is
Mm.
1890 to 1914, roughly. And yeah, they're just very different characters and unusual, and they've got good stories to tell.
Yeah, it's remarkable that it's only a quarter of a century, right? I mean, we're talking about, broadly speaking, when Test cricket's just starting, or at least when Test cricket's given that designation in
Yes, yeah.
1890, retrospectively, and then through until, of course, World War One. And the story we're about to tell today does, feature a career which is stopped abruptly, maybe not only due to World War One, but World War One is certainly a factor in it, in Syd Emery, and the way in which these cricketers have, um, I suppose, reputations that are far greater maybe than other generations and other eras. I mean, can you speak to
Mm.
that about why you feel this particular group of cricketers who played in that pre-World War One era have so much affection over a century later.
Yeah, I think there's the amateur professional thing. I suppose my focus has been on guys who aren't the batsmen, the amateurs, the well-heeled. They're fairly well known, particularly the English ones. And um, my fascination has been with, and I think the attraction of a lot of people once they get to know them is with these professional guys. This was their living, and they during the summer time anyway. Um, and they had to make a go of it. And this was their way of, for some of them, like Syd, seeing the world. That no way would they have been able to go to North America, to England and the UK and so on without cricket. And I think there's that fascination even with the batsmen who I haven't
Mm,
focused on as much. They're stylish, they're revolutionary. As far as Sid's concerned, we'll get on to this, I'm sure. He's part
mm,
of the whole start of the googly bowling. He's not that long after Bosanquet had sort of
mm,
invented the googly, and so things that are still got resonance today in cricket still have a legacy. The googly bowling, the stylish cricket, the shots that were being played. These are guys that we've got a lot to be thankful for. Because
mm.
they took a risk, they were pioneering, and they were trailblazers. And they're not just some old fuddy duddies from over a century ago that nerds like me sort of are half interested in. They're important figures in cricket history. And I
Yeah,
think a lot of people, more people are recognising that.
yeah, yeah. It's well put. So it's this book is via the Cricket Publishing Company,
Yes,
and that includes Ronald Cardwell, who's written quite moving forward. Actually, well,
yes,
Greg Chappell
yeah,
wrote the forward,
yeah.
which of itself is terrific stuff. But the publisher's note here, which goes back to an interaction that he had with our subject Syd Emery
Mm,
not long
yeah,
before he died in his, I guess he
yeah,
would have been his late 70s or early 80s in
yeah.
the mid 1960s when Ronald was a boy. I mean, talk us through the discovery here that there was some link between who you were looking into and this scrapbook and that interaction at a grade ground all those decades ago.
Yeah, so Ronald's he's published over 100 cricket books, all off his own bat. He's written quite a few, and he's very supportive in the first book that I wrote about Jack Cuff about 5 years ago now. And he was very keen to publish that, and we got it out during COVID, very quickly, and it did very well. So when I was looking for another subject to investigate, Emery intrigued me because of his nickname. It was Mad Mick. And I'd seen references to this, in different reading, and you come across him all the time. Sid Mad Mick Emery, and why is he called Mad Mick? Who called him that?
Mm,
Why is he called that? So I put that to Ronald, and Ronald said in his own inimitable way, "Oh, well, do you want his 1912 scrapbook from the 1912 tour? I've got it at home." And I went, "What? You've got it?" And he said, "Oh, yeah." So he told me the story. So Fergie, the scorer of those, who you know well, and we did the help at the grave and everything last year and so on. So Bill Ferguson was the scorer on the 1912 tour, and on many, many tours right through to the 50s for Australia. He put together scrapbooks for the players who wanted a memento of the tours that they'd been on at the end of the tour, and he'd sell them to them at not a big price, but it was one way of him making a little bit of money on the side besides what he was getting for the scoring. And so he did one for Syd. This is Syd's only Australian tour in 1912, and by the time we get to the mid 1960s, as you say, Ron's playing a game at Petersham Oval as a schoolboy, and he notices as he's walking around the ground, his team are batting, and he's batting down the order, an old man sitting there, and he starts talking to him, and it ends up being Syd Emery. Right? This is at Petersham Oval, not that far from where we were at the brewery the other night, and the final
mm,
word catch up, just down the road from there, Petersham Oval, where Syd ends up playing in his later club career, grade career, and uh, Ron the next day comes back and Syd's back there again watching. Syd's well into his 70s by this stage. In fact, he must be in his early 80s because he was born
yep.
in 1885. And he's just about gone blind by this stage, and he's brought back the scrapbook on the second day and said to Ron, you seem to be someone very keen on cricket. I can hardly see anymore, I suppose, is one of the reasons he gave it to him. He had no further use for it. He had no children, even though he's married. And he gave Ron the scrapbook, which Ron was one of Ron's first keepsakes in a huge memorabilia collection that he's got. And so this was the scrapbook that he was able to show me the next day with news clippings that Bill Ferguson had put together for Syd, a green scrapbook, and he writes about that very movingly, as you say, in the publisher's note at the start of the book.
Yeah, and we're going to spend a bit of time talking about 1912 shortly. It's an extraordinary story, full stop, but Emery's part in it. So we've got this framing of the scrapbook, and thus you've got all that contemporary reporting from the time. But let's go back to even earlier than that, McDonaldtown, which most people now would only recognise as a railway station, but now known as Erskineville, and the tragic story behind why the suburb had its name changed. And that's, I think, an important framing device here to give a sense of the type of Sydney that Syd had been sort of catapulted into as a young man.
Yeah, so Syd's parents came out from England a couple of years before he was born. Pretty sure he was called Sydney because they came to Sydney, so he's Sydney. Almost certain of that. And yeah, so he's born in 1885 at McDonaldtown, a suburb, inner city suburb in Sydney, close to Newtown, for those who know that sort of area. At that time, very much working class, almost a slum area, really. Very basic accommodation. Syd's got two older sisters and an older brother, and they're in a house that they're obviously renting as they come out here. His dad's a saddler, so there's lots of tradesmen, lots of labourers, probably lots of unemployed, and lots of crime, unfortunately, in that area as a result. So soon after Syd's born, in that very suburb, there's a couple called the Makins, John and Sarah Macon, and a way of them making money. And this is a pretty grisly story, a bit of a warning here for listeners. They took in babies of unwed mothers, so mothers who were unwed and or couldn't look after the children that had been born to them, and their offer was for a few shillings or whatever every week. They would take care of their babies and bring them up. And the end result was they're doing this under this guise, and they're actually taking in a lot of babies, and they're killing the babies, burying them in their backyards. They're moving from house to house to try to avoid, the mothers looking for their children, until they're finally caught. There's this story of tradesmen doing some piping work at the back of one of the houses that the Makins rented, and they found the remains of a very young infant, and that led to the police investigation, the court case. Macon was hung for it. His wife was sentenced to life in prison. She eventually got out. This is the sort of suburb that Syd was growing up in, where this sort of thing was happening. And it just gives a sense, I think, of the context that he was growing up in. This is someone who's come from very little and very hard sort of rough times.
I mean, the fact that they literally changed the name of the suburb as a
Yes,
response to this, right?
yeah.
As you've reported in the book, that it was such a, McDonaldtown could no longer be, given this was what it was synonymous for, this horrific case that you refer to.
Yeah, so there is another reason it got changed, but it was going to happen probably anyway. So it's now known as Erskineville. There's a picture of McDonaldtown Station, which Sydney-siders would probably know. It still exists as a train station, but it's no longer a suburb. That's all that exists of it, and that's the background to it. Yeah.
So our guy, Mad Mick, Syd Emery, I think maybe we'll weave in the Mad Mick stuff a little bit later about his clear challenges that he experienced through life. Let's begin with the cricket. Googlies at pace. I love the idea of all the reporting you've got in here refers to the way he kind of really charged in and bowled at a real pace, but at the back of his hand, just when googly bowling was as you mentioned before, Bosanquet, receiving this notoriety around the cricketing world.
Yeah, so he's He's originally a fast bowler. He plays for Newtown. He plays in the local competitions until he's probably left school, and then he ends up at Redfern Club, another inner city suburb that a lot of people would know. That's his main grade club. But this is at the time where Bosanquet come out to Australia. The four South African googly bowlers in the 1910-11 tour, so Faulkner and Schwartz and so on.
Mm.
Ranji Horden is a contemporary of Emery's. Surprisingly, I've discovered, and I put this in the book, there's a lot of googly bowlers in Sydney grade cricket. Almost every club seems to have one or two, and some of them are getting through to New South Wales level, like Syd. So Syd's he seems to have picked it up at the SCG nets, where there's a bit of googly bowling going on, and he tries it out, and he's pretty good at it. He can really spin them. He bowls at pace. Um, and he does well enough in grade cricket from his first game onwards in first grade for Redfern to a sudden rise into the New South Wales team, mainly based on his bowling. Although he's got a few other strings to his bow, which we might
He does.
which we might get to. But the problem that we'll see with his bowling all the way through is Patrick Faraday in his book on the 1912 tour. The triangular tournament, called Sid's bowling unplayable at times, but also unreachable at other times. So, yeah, he never finds consistency, and it's no surprise. This is new. He probably hasn't got many people to teach him. He tries and tries and tries, and he bowls some fantastic balls. He gets 180 first class wickets in a very short career, and but can never get that consistency to really nail a spot in the test team, and as we'll get to, as I'm sure too. So that's part of the reason I called it
Yeah.
the book, The Erratic Syd Emery. His bowling is erratic, but that's not
Yeah.
the only reason.
Yeah, I mean that's it, isn't it? As his cricket career as it is his life, and that's a nice link between that, and maybe there's something to that about the disposition of the types of people who would be inclined to bowl at the back of the hand. I don't know. There's
Have you
probably
got a
something
theory
there.
about that?
I do have a bit of a theory on that, but anyway, let's deal with our topic though. I love the evocative way that you write about club cricket. Yeah, I know you've got a strong, I suppose, through line with your own life in Sydney club cricket, but the way in which games at Redfern were so highly attended, where some of the greats of the era. I mean, you talk about One Day with Trumper, for instance. These were enormous cricketing events where people would come from across the city to watch a grade game, and Syd is dominating. He's front and centre of all of this in these formative stages of his life before he reaches New South Wales ranks.
Yeah, so yeah, amazing crowds, like 10,000 we're talking about at a Sydney first grade game. I'm going to one this Saturday and there'll be less than 20 there. It's just, and they packed in and they had to turn them away. When Trumper did play that famous game that Maley writes about in his book, they people couldn't get in. But there was a train station, and there still is at Redfern, so people were able to get there easily. There were omnibuses. It was a very accessible ground, right? Uh, and it was a very small ground, so it was very intimate too. So people could really feel that they knew these great players. They'd see them up close. And yeah, cricket was really booming at this time. New South Wales, as a result, were very strong because there were a lot of very good cricketers in that system, and it was very popular. And just yeah, huge crowd. So Sid would have been a well-known person in Sydney in the pre-war era,
Mm.
because people were working, in this working sort of class area. They would have been working till lunchtime on a Saturday. Game started at 2:15 on a Saturday
Wow.
afternoon, played till about 6. Um, so there's, the scores there are enormous, in such a short time, and over rates are a little bit better than they are today, and so they got their money's worth if they paid money. Redfern was one of those grounds where entry charges was only into the grandstand, I think, and yeah, they flocked to it and loved it, and it became a big part of Sydney life. Particularly, this is people who work 5.5 days. This is their leisure activity on a Saturday afternoon,
Mm.
to go and watch some very good standard of cricket and down tools for the week, sort of for that day.
So he's not a tall man, but he is a strong man. Arthur Maley at one point compares him to Hercules in the way that he
Yeah,
approaches
yeah.
and bounds to the crease. And sort of feels foretold with the success he's enjoying with Redfern. And you go through the numbers, these massive seasons where he's banking
yeah,
lots of wickets, making
yeah,
rapid runs, which again
yeah,
feels thoroughly in keeping with his personality that he tries to
yeah,
hit virtually every ball for six at one stage.
yeah,
But then he, gets his chance and he takes it big time. A notable game at the MCG where he routs the Victorians, taking 7 for 28 and Pfeiffer in the other innings. So a 12 wicket
yeah,
match at the G, and
yeah,
that
yeah.
changes his life forever.
Yeah, no, he has a very rapid rise, as I said, to New South Wales cricket, and then he just takes to Shield cricket, like a duck to water. He really, um, particularly when he's given the chance, they're probably a little bit reluctant about him because of the inconsistency, because he hasn't been around that much. New South Wales have got a very strong team, and he's
Mm.
worked his way into it. And yeah, he has that remarkable day at New South at the MCG, having been 12th man, I think, in Adelaide in the game before that. So bit of criticism in the press about whether he should have been picked or not, but he proves the selectors right by really doing well in that first season, particularly that first game you refer to.
Yeah, and look, because there's so much power concentrated in Melbourne and Sydney in cricket, it's like, again, if you're doing
Mm.
well in those types of
Yeah,
marquee Shield fixtures with luminaries of the game, you're a decent chance of getting a chance for the Aussies. And so it proved when they send him to New Zealand in one of these quirky non-test tours that Jeff and I have explored on Storytime in the past. But it goes really well over there.
yeah,
Heaps of wickets there, so it's like
mm,
the in-between step, if you like, the Australia A step maybe,
yeah,
is
yeah,
one that suits him too.
yeah. So he's done well enough to be selected there. It is basically an Australia A team. A good number of future Test players there, and again he does well. He suddenly goes overseas, which for the first time, and as I said, from a boy from McDonaldtown to travel over to New Zealand as 15, he's probably about mid 20s by this stage only, and yeah, and his batting is also, you referred to that, trying to hit everything for six. It's a very good string to his bow because soon after he comes back from New Zealand, he plays against the touring South Africans for New South Wales, and he gets 80 not out and 50 not out in no time. The good thing about his batting and is that he settled down and he was a lot more selective with his shots. So he was just came out and had a slog basically, which fits his personality. He's this sort of skittish sort of personality as he becomes, but he actually becomes a decent all-round batsman as he
Mm,
settles down and can defend also. And
yeah.
Redfern Oval, as I said, is where he got a lot of runs very quickly. It was a small oval. This is where Trumper gets 335 in 3 hours at Redfern Oval, almost a decade before this. So that suits him. His fielding, he's okay, but he drops some catches. There's reports of him, not quite being the best sort of reliable fieldsman, and he's running between the wickets is terrible. When he's batting, he's very skittish there. He's running guys out at crucial times. He's running himself out, and it's probably one thing that holds his cricket back a bit, and
Mm.
his reputation as an all-round cricketer. But he's got a lot going for him.
Yeah, yeah. It sort of reminded me when reading about that, sort of the Jack Iverson when he got his chance to play
Yeah,
for Australia a few decades on. That, yeah, I mean, sure, he was a wonder with the ball in his hand, but it was the other bits of the game. Although in this case, of course, you mentioned the 80 not out against the South Africans, that tour of 1910-11 with
yeah,
the four Bosu bowlers,
yeah.
and that's enough to get him front and center when they're considering what they're going to do in 1912. Now, it's worth just recapping what 1912 constitutes an incredibly odd tour. It's going to be the triangular, but the lead up to it as well, which you've written about and we've spoken about, where there is a revolt. There is a selector thrown out a window, and you're enough to it. And there's not going to be Trumper or a host of others, Clem Hill included. And it does provide opportunities for almost that Australia A team from New Zealand from a couple of years ago to fill in the gaps. And Syd's the beneficiary there.
That's right. So they're needing spinners. There's the big six are missing definitely. There's been other retirements, and the opportunity opens for him, and it's seen as a pretty weak team, Australian team that's selected, but he's part of it, and he's earned his spot in it, as far as I'm concerned,
Mm.
and um, yeah, and things don't pan out for him on that tour. We're talking about a guy who only plays 4 tests and takes 5 test wickets. But there's other things that happen on that tour which are very significant for his life, really.
Yeah, I feel like he could have done an entire book on his 1912. I mean, there is so much to this, isn't
Yeah,
there? I mean,
yeah,
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 and you can't miss the. I guess it's a defining quote about his life, isn't it? Of himself, I'd be a great man if I could control myself,
yeah,
which
yeah,
comes up whenever you sort of read of him in your book and
yeah,
other places too.
yeah,
So
yeah.
and it's of his bowling, but of his life and the way he's interpreted on the 1912 tour. It's funny, like reading about him early on, he doesn't strike me as a kind of a loutish figure,
Mm.
but he gets the
No,
reputation on that trip of being precisely this, despite the success he's enjoying at the beginning. A bit like at
yeah,
the MCG, he arrives on the tour, has a 12-wicket match this time against
yep,
Northants, and
that's
he's
right.
vaulted into the sort of the idea of being in the starting 11. And then, that moment at Lords with Jack Hobbs, which you might speak to as well, where
Mm, mm,
this is a cricketer who is, it feels like at the very start of this 1912 trip, he's actually peaking. He's hitting the
yeah,
peak of his powers at the perfect time.
yep. So the first Uh, three first-class games he played on the tour against the counties. He took 30 wickets, including that 12 he mentioned, but he kept going. And the next game he got 10 or 11, and then the next game he got 8. And the press can't work him out. They've seen googly bowlers before, but he's bowling fast and he's befuddling the batsmen and getting good players out. He's getting CB Fry out in the MCC game. He's getting Warner out. And then the Hobbs wicket at
Mm.
Lords in the tests. It's a rain affected test. It's a very wet summer. It's a disaster of a summer all up. The whole triangular thing doesn't work, and South Africa are very weak. Australia aren't that great, and wet weather dogs it. But in that in that game, so Hobbs is the best batsman in the world, with Trumper at this time, and Syd comes on late. Syd Gregory's a very conservative captain. He lets things sort of drift. This is his 8th tour to England, so he should have
Mm.
known,
Mm.
how to play there. But eventually Syd comes on, and Hobbs has got a very good 100 on a wettish wicket. They've been off and on, and he's played a masterly innings. Sid comes on. Soon after he comes on, he bowls what CB Fry says, from the non-strikers end, is one of the best balls, most unplayable balls he's ever seen bowled. It's very similar in what it sounds like to the ball of the century. It drifts in. It's probably a bit quicker, but it pitches outside leg and it hits the top of Hobbs's off stump after he's got to 100. So that's what Sid's capable of, and that's probably why I call the book McDonaldtown to Lords. That was the peak moment of his career, and I suppose unravelling from that is, why it doesn't why it doesn't keep going as well as it could have, especially in that tour.
Yeah, and this is where it doesn't all quite piece together because he's
No.
doing that in one of the 4 Test matches he's afforded.
Mm.
5 wickets at 50 is the raw numbers, and
Yeah.
67 at 23 on the tour in totality in first class cricket. But including
Mm.
Hobbs and Warner and
Yeah.
CB Fry, and it just feels
Yeah.
like almost from nowhere that this all falls apart for him. There's so many full tosses, nobody could quite place him or understand
No.
him.
No.
And there's a quote somewhere from CB Fry, isn't there, about being the best worst bowler in the world or the worst best
Yeah.
bowler in the world or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's your theory on why mid tour it all falls off the cliff for a guy who, as I mentioned before, it feels like he's peaking at the perfect time, maybe a bit like Warne in '93. I know the tour is a bit of a mess with the wettest summer in a century,
Yeah.
whatever it was in 1912, but I know
Yeah.
again that it's not the same as other Ashes series because of the involvement of the third party, variety of factors, but still, what is it about Emery that you think takes him from the top to the bottom almost within a couple of months?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's one that I really want to investigate pretty thoroughly, because this was at the heart of trying to work out his cricket career anyway, why it didn't all come together. It's a remarkable start, really. 30 wickets in 3 games, when he's never been there before. He doesn't play in the first game on the tour. He's very much like a reserve player. We'll give him a go now and then. They can't help but pick him in the test team.
Mm.
Um, so there's a few factors here. One is, he gets injured. He hurts his finger. He's out for a number of weeks during the middle of the tour. He doesn't play just when things are starting to warm up a bit and the tests are happening. So he misses a couple of tests there, and um, I think the players got a bit more used to him too. So they played him in MCC games or county games, and then in the tests, and they've started to work him out. That he's not someone who's unplayable all the time. So I think they're waiting for his bad ball, and they can put him away. I suppose the most interesting part of this is he's part of the bad behaviour by the Australians on tour. There's a drinking culture. That's nothing new in cricket. He's not in the Ben Duckett or Harry Brook category, but he's on the periphery of a group here of Victorians. I hate to tell you, Adam, Jimmy Matthews and Barlow Carkeek, who Gideon has written about very evocatively in the last year or so. Dave Smith. Their basically cards are marked after this tour. The manager gives them a very bad report. They never play for Australia again. They certainly never tour again. And I know the war comes in, but they really were troublemakers. There was a group of the Australians who were teetotalers. They were strict religious people like Bardsley and McCartney and so on. And these guys really had a rousing time. And I think Patrick Faraday in that book puts it well that Emery's on the periphery of it. Right? He's not reported. His cards aren't marked forever, but that certainly there seems to be a fair bit of drinking, and I think that affects his performance. So after on a long tour, if you're drinking regularly. It's going to, with all the train travel and it's an exhausting sort of itinerary they're given and so on, it's going to take its toll. And I think with the injury that he had, the weather wasn't great for leg spin bowling, the cold weather, the rain, people started to work him out. And he had some other decent performances, but he never reached that peak again.
They say an affliction or a trait, perhaps, if you want to be generous, of people with ADHD is that they keep prescribing everybody else with ADHD in their lives. When reading this book, one of the symptoms is that you get heavily invested in things that you're interested in, and the fact that later in life he becomes so conservative and a
Yeah,
Freemason and leads a life like that strikes me that this is perhaps in keeping with this theme that when he got a little bit interested in something, i.e., getting on the
mm,
piss and having fun,
yeah,
that he got
yeah,
super involved in that in a hurry. And
yeah,
it's like this
yeah.
is a theme for him that he has these strong periods of being one thing or another. I wonder whether you arrived at similar conclusions because I know mental health is going to come up later when we get
Yeah,
to World War One,
yeah,
but
yeah,
whether it was less just a simple case of a man who suffered depression, more a person who these days would be described as having a neurodivergent personality of
yes,
sorts.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And since I've written the book and you've mentioned that to me, that makes a lot of sense. Uh, because one of the fascinating things about Emery for me was he was hard to pin down. He's
Mm.
just not the same character from his early days through to his death. Like a lot of these guys, Bardsley and McCartney, and they have their troubles, but they're the same sort of character all the way through. He's very shy when he first comes into first grade at Redfern. He doesn't say boo. He's known as the shy Syd Emery when he's in the New South Wales team. When he goes to New Zealand, there's no reports of this at all. No bad behaviour, no drinking. He just he's amongst some cricketers that he admires, and he's taking his opportunity, and he fits in with them in a quiet way. I think he gets excited. He goes to England. He's going to Ireland, Scotland, and they're meeting the king. This is very different for a working class bloke from McDonaldtown, and and he gets in with this crowd, and there's probably a bit of a split between the teetotalers and the drinkers. He's a drinker at this stage, and yeah, he certainly becomes almost a class clown, and probably more so in the next year when he goes to
Yeah,
North America.
yeah. I think it's exactly that. Like people who are neurodivergent tend to shapeshift a little bit in terms of how
Yeah,
they can be, depending on their company, because they fear rejection, and
yeah, yeah,
that's a huge part of the huge part of. Yeah, the more I read about him through your book, the more I'm like, this guy strikes me as someone who was suffering from this and was just trying to get
yeah,
by.
Yeah,
and thus he finds himself in this crew. So he goes all in because that's what people like that do. And then when he goes in a different direction, when his life stabilizes a little bit in the post World War II period for him, or maybe before that, but still, that he goes completely the other way and thoroughly invested in being a more sort of straight laced kind of cat. So this is a part of the 1912 story. So and that reputational piece really hurts him. The idea of being Mad Mick. I mean, it's a fairly
yeah, yeah,
fairly
yeah,
strong nickname, isn't it? It'll follow you
yeah.
around if you're known as Mad Mick.
Mm.
No one's going to forget that, are they?
No, no. And then I think where he gets that nickname is on the next in the next year. So on the way back from England, um, there's a proposal put to the team that they visit North America. There's an entrepreneur there. He goes with a group of them. Not all of them go on to a pretty basically a money making venture to North America where they're well looked after and they're paid very well to play these games. We know North America with Bart King and so
Mm.
on at this stage, and the Gentlemen of Philadelphia and so on. This is a good standard of cricket still. It's not just exhibition games, and Emery clearly loves this too, But the Victorians is on this part of the tour too, so he's having a pretty good time there. The next year, then the tour to North America's gone so well, and it's made money for the players and the entrepreneur Benjamin, who's a Jewish businessman from Sydney, who's got connections, in America quite clearly. He does the whole itinerary and sorts everything out and the accommodation, and they're very well looked after. So quite a few of them are keen to go back again on an unofficial Australian tour, led by
Mm.
Austin Diamond, one of the characters that I've been heavily invested in investigating and might do a book on at some stage. But Ernie Main is the captain. There's a good team here. Arthur Maley joins them, so he's not played for Australia at this stage. And Arthur Maley's playing at Redfern with Emery, so he knows him well. And Arthur Maley's a fascinating character. He gets married, and the next day he's on the boat to America, and
Grab an
says
S.
goodbye to his wife. Yeah, yeah.
Well,
Well,
there are
he doesn't
similarities.
bring the wife to him with him like Jesse. There's no honeymoon. It's she leaves him at the docks, one day into the marriage. So, but it's Arthur Maley who gives Syd the name, the nickname, and the moniker Mad Mick on this North American tour. So he probably could have been called that in England, and it's on this North America tour where he really acts out and he's really the class clown. He's getting lots of runs and wickets and he's doing well with his cricket. Very well. He gets 5 wickets and 5 balls in one sort of non-first class game on that tour. And he gets lots of runs. But he's acting very strange. And I list a few of the incidents in the book there. I won't go through all of them, but he almost gets eaten alive by a grizzly bear as he's trying to take a photo of it somewhere in the mountains, and he's found in the bath smoking. In a full bathtub of water. This is the only way I can stay cool. It's cold in this hot temperature. He's putting up the white handkerchief as a white flag as someone hits him for six in one of the games. He's getting fined by the team $10 for some misdemeanor, and he's selling his bat to one of the Americans, giving it for $10 and paying the fine that way. He's all over the shop, and
Mm.
he's likable. He's not a troublemaker, um, but he's just really acting out, as you say, maybe to just feel part of the team, to win their approval, to have them laugh at him and feel that he's the joke of the team clown. He's getting a bit of attention and so on. But yeah, it's very different from the shy Sid Emery and then the later Sid Emery, certainly.
Yeah, because the way it sequences, they in the States twice plays. There are
Yep.
so many
Yeah.
games against the Gentlemen of Philadelphia.
Yeah.
5 of his first class games are against them. There are a couple of games against Canadian and American
Yeah.
composite teams that round out the
Yep.
second tour. But I mean, he enjoys it so much, does he not, that he considers staying and
Yeah.
doesn't want to
Yeah.
necessarily return. He does return after the first one for a couple of Shield games in 12-13. But broadly speaking, he's like, I found my place. I found my people. I
Yeah.
want to be an
Yeah.
American.
Yeah. Yeah. He says as he's getting on the boat, this is me. I'm gone. And some of the reports say, oh well, your career's probably finished here anyway. So good luck over there. And whether he was serious about that or not, but he certainly enjoyed his time on those two tours, and they all did, whether they were teetotalers or not. They were well looked after, as I said, and these were financially profitable too. we haven't mentioned his work life. He's basically a clerk in the tramways department for New South Wales. He starts, at a low level. He's on about 120 pounds a year, at the height of it. He's not getting a lot of money, and he's basically having to resign and try to get back his job as he's coming back and forth from England and America. So he's making a lot more money, and it's hard to work out how much money they actually got paid. It was never really revealed, but we're talking well into the hundreds of pounds for these tours, and he's certainly, as you say, found his sort of happy place, on these tours.
I mean, he's doing his thing though. He does the double on that
Yeah,
American
yeah,
tour, more than
yeah,
a
yeah,
thousand runs and
yeah,
100 wickets. So he's still
yeah,
obviously
yeah,
a capable cricketer, but
yeah,
it's all
yeah.
coming to an end anyway. I mean, after the Austin Diamond trip in 1913, there is no more first class cricket for him. There's this quirky bit where you've got here there's a game he's not selected for New South Wales, and yet he still ends up in the team photo, which you put in the
Yeah,
book, and like there's
yeah,
just
yeah.
this very odd dismount. And look, obviously you can't divorce that from what's going on in global affairs and the fact that there's going to be a war breaking out in Europe. But it seems to me that even then his card's marked, notwithstanding the Australian trips he's been on, that he's not really part of New
Mm.
South Wales' thinking anymore.
No, no. So he has this year or two where a lot of things go wrong for him, and this is leading on to the war years, obviously. But we're getting this erratic personality, I suppose. So
Yeah,
that's what I'm getting at. I think it's quite a clever title for the book. The erratic Syd Emery. His bowling's erratic. His personality's erratic. Even in
yeah,
the same year, he's acting very strangely, and that becomes more apparent during the war years. But yeah, he's basically before the war, even if cricket continued, I'd say his first class career wouldn't have continued. His performances drop off. He gets injured. He's not doing as well for Redfern. There's something gone wrong with him there, and he starts to drop off, and that's the end of him, end of it for him.
yeah. A very short first class career in relative terms.
Mm.
183 wickets at
Yeah,
23 for those who
yeah,
are interested, and made 6 half centuries as well with the bat. So a very useful set of numbers as a first class player. But when it ends, mention the war again. He doesn't enlist, which is odd on face
yeah,
value, because he
yeah,
was of the right age and of the right, I guess, makeup. A strong
yep,
young man in
yeah,
his
yeah,
20s
yep.
that most would have at that point been signing up, but he doesn't. And the links that you draw here, and obviously you're working with limited information, but
Mm.
deaths in the family and
Yep.
what appears to be a fairly substantial bout of mental illness, because they describe him as
Mm.
being injured repeatedly and not playing cricket
Yeah,
in
yeah.
this period of time. But there's no obvious injury, so one's to
No,
conclude that it
no.
must be that he's fallen off a cliff mentally here.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be any physical ailments, or they would mention that without any problems. He's just described as being on the sick list for an
Yeah,
extended period. So as grade cricket continues in Sydney, right, during the war, first class cricket obviously ends soon after the war begins, but he's still playing for Redfern. Then he's strangely absent from the second innings of one match. Um, he's turning up a bit late, and he's playing in black pants. He turns up in one game, which is like just very unusual, at that time. Um, and he's you mentioned deaths in his family, so both his parents died, just before this, pretty soon after each other. He seems pretty close to them. I'm pretty sure he's living at home, for a lot of this time. He's still single, and his uncle and aunt die at the same time. He has struggles getting his job back. I think the
mm.
tramways sort of disbar him, um, and things are happening for him. We haven't mentioned his brother,
I was going to
Vic.
say, I mean, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
Victor Emery, who seems like one of the
yeah,
loosest units going around. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
his military record is,
yeah,
to say it's sketchy would be a great understatement. The hard
yeah,
labour.
yeah,
What did you describe it as? Like military crucifixion, where they strapped him
yeah,
to a pole
yeah,
for 2 days without
yeah,
food, and
yeah,
all of these
yeah,
various things that he had
yeah,
done.
yeah.
I'm not saying that he committed crimes as much as
No, no,
there's a through
no.
line, isn't there? He was on the piss and going absent constantly. Whether he was
Yeah,
at
yeah,
training
yeah,
or whether he was when he was deployed in France as well. His younger
yeah,
brother had
yeah.
bits that weren't connecting either.
Yeah, and I think that would have been embarrassing for Emery. Luckily, I've never seen anyone in the press put two and two together. That this guy's who even before the war, he's a vagrant. He's
Mm,
assaulting people. He's stealing. He's in and out of the courts. He's in jail. No one's put, and they're reported pretty well in the press. No one's worked out that that's Sid's younger brother,
mm,
which would be good for Sid, because as we know about this time, he becomes a very stable conservative man. He would have been pretty embarrassed about this black sheep in the family, Vic. So put all that together with his parents dying, and his job's sort of on the line, and his first class career's over. Things sort of compound, and he's on the sick list.
I feel I was enthused by the second, well, the last bit, the last act of the book, I suppose you would say, where he finds that stability that had eluded him when he was playing for Australia, partly through his second club there with Petersham and the work he did both on the field but off the field, crucially, and spent a long time in service to the game, and it feels like the Freemasonry is part of that story around the same
Yep,
time. And he finds some
yep.
purpose. And again, like I mentioned before, he finds new passions and gets heavily invested in these new topics in his life.
Yeah, so Bardsley and McCartney and Maley and Kippax, all these guys are Masons. We know something of the Mason Catholic split when Bradman was around the 30s, but there's a lot of Masons playing and running cricket at this time, and I've listed them at the back of the book. Those who played
Mm,
Test cricket, it's quite amazing how many of them were Freemasons. And after that tour to America, he joins the Newtown Lodge, and he never ever misses a meeting. As you say, he's heavily invested in it, and he's obsessed, almost obsessive about it. He's so dedicated, he's loyal, he's devoted. He obviously stops drinking, I reckon, when he becomes a Mason, and he settles down completely, and he marries. Probably well into his late 20s, early 30s. Um, he gets his job back. He stays with the tramways right through to the 50s or 60s when he retires. He's got a very stable job. He buys a house at Petersham. As you say, he plays for Petersham. Redfern is disbanded as a club during the war. They had so many sign up from the club that they couldn't field teams during the war period. And so they, unfortunately, for a very strong club that's produced Maley and other Test and New South Wales cricketers, it's also something that I'm going to investigate a bit further, the whole Redfern story, because they had 11 state cricket, first class cricketers in their very short
mm,
existence, and Emery was one of them. Um, but he then, once he starts playing again as the war's finishing, and he seems to come out of this funk or being on the sick list, starts playing for Petersham. He plays first grade for them, and as you say, he's completely devoted clubman. He's on the committee. He drops down the grades. He runs the third team. He's the captain of that. He's on the selection panel. He's a mentor for younger players. And some of the very few written words we've got of Emery are his club reports. As a as a third grade captain, he really just settles down. It's hard to work out that this is Mad Mick. It just seems
yeah.
to be a completely different person, and that's how he lives the rest of his life. And it's a good story in some ways that he doesn't suffer. I don't think he settles down. He seems to be very happy in his own skin for the last 30, 40 years of his life.
Yeah, it's a loving conclusion. You write to that
Yeah,
and describe him as having many layers to him, and lives
yeah,
a long life to the age of 81 when he gives away his his scrapbook
yeah,
to Ron,
yeah,
which is part of what
yeah,
you do, and dies in
yeah,
1967. I mean, sadly, there's only those 5 lines in Wisdom, but
yeah,
you've done a power of good here in making sure that the record is corrected, and his extraordinary, erratic but
yeah,
extraordinary time as a
yeah.
cricketer is documented. It must be quite fulfilling now that that's you've done the job. The work he's done. His life has been appropriately accounted for.
Yeah, no, very, very happy, very proud of the book that we've uncovered a test player. So he's not a complete nobody, but someone who aficionados would have heard of. They probably know the moniker Mad Mick, but not much more. And his story deserves to be told because it's multi-layered, as you say, and it's just yeah, he's got these different personalities, different stages in his life, very, very different stages in his life. So while he's been hard to pin down, been trying to work out, what sort of life he lived, which was varied. It was challenging at times, but he comes good, and he's basically someone I liked in the end, which
Yeah.
is I can't say for all the guys that I've written about, but he's a likable character, and he's a good man by the end of it.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, 473 men have played Test cricket for Australia. He's done
Mm.
102nd, I think his cap number is, isn't it?
Yeah,
102. But
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah,
a
yeah,
small club, and all of those stories are
yeah,
worthy in their
yeah.
own way. And you've done an outstanding job of it. I'll come to a couple of topics in a sec, but just wanted to show the book one last time. The Erratic Syd Emery. It is so good. Every time you write about this era, it's compelling, and I can only recommend it. It's available in a link that I'll put into the show notes. So before I let you go, Pat, we've got your Bert Foucault story is also doing the rounds at the moment, which
Yeah, yeah.
I think we've touched on before, but Pat's one of the unluckiest Australian cricketers in that he was picked for 14,
Mm.
15 to South Africa when the war broke
Yeah,
out, and that
yeah,
was that, and died at a young age too.
yeah. So he was a New South Wales all-rounder. Very simply, he was a fascinating character to me because he had this other part to his life where he was a mental health attendant at Callan Park Asylum for over 30 years, where he played a lot of cricket. Did the pitch there, ran teams there. It was a very popular venue in Sydney in the early part of the 20th century. All sorts of teams went there. All sorts of great players went there, including Trumper, etc. Um, and Bert Folkard was so dedicated to that it held back his cricket career, so that he only made his first class debut against that South African team we were talking about, where he gets six for
Mm,
30 odd in his first game, but he's well into his 30s by then. By the time the South African tour happens in 1914, he's 36. So
mm.
he's in some ways lucky to make that team, but in other words, unlucky because the war prevents him ever playing for Australia. So that's another fascinating story, I think.
And I've always wanted to get you on to talk about Jack Cuff as well. I mean,
Yeah,
that first book
yeah,
you did about a bloke who's probably a bit like Syd Emery, if I'm honest.
yeah,
I think
yeah,
about Jack
yeah,
Cuff, and there's an erraticism to his existence until he ends
definitely.
up
Yeah,
in Worcester. And I know you've had the chance to go to Worcester and to research him
mm,
personally,
yeah,
well,
yeah,
firsthand. Sorry, but this is
yeah.
it feels like this is going to be your thing now, isn't it? You're going to find these stories. I mean, I'm almost reticent to ask you because I don't want you to spoil it. But have you got one on the go at the moment? Have you got a story that you're currently pulling together behind the scenes and researching?
So not one we've just finished. So Peter Lloyd was a co-author with me. So he's done some magnificent books on Noble and Bardsley and McCartney. Big, thick volumes, very extensive, very detailed, incredibly well researched and written. And we just joined up. He actually did quite a bit of proofreading and suggestions for the Emery book. I was doing the similar for him for Noble, I think. And then we thought, let's do one together, and that's where Folkard came out. We just sort of not picked him out of a hat, but thought here's a guy that we both agreed has got a different story. So Peter and I, then Peter's been fascinated with McCartney in particular. McCartney took a
Mm,
team of New South Wales players to New Zealand, right? Like Emery went to New Zealand, but a New South Wales team, basically the Shield team, with a few exceptions, to New Zealand in 1923-24, and we've done that book. That'll be out in February. It's self-published, just like Folkard has been. Very happy with it. What we've uncovered from the New Zealand side of the story. This is New Zealand just before they're in Test cricket. Our argument is this tour is a big stepping stone in New Zealand gaining Test status because they've got exposure to very good players. There's Kippax, there's McCartney, there's Oldfield. Um, and there happens to be a fellow called Austin Punch on this tour who was very unlucky not to make the 1921 team to England. He was a pretty good batsman, middle order batsman for New South Wales, was doing very well. And missed that tour. New South Wales already had 9 players on the tour, so they didn't want to pick a 10th, I don't think. And so Ernie Main, who we mentioned before, gets Punch's spot. Austin Punch's son was my cricket coach at school.
right.
And going back to where we're starting, here I am as a school cricket coach, right, into my early 60s. Michael Punch as my cricket coach. Was very inspirational to me, very significant in my life, and inspired me to, to do teaching and to be a cricket coach, very much in the mould that he coached me. all those years ago, and he's now 84, and his father, Austin Punch, was on this 1923-24 tour. So it's a nice sort of link there. And Michael has Austin's scrapbook. We go back to scrapbooks again, um, from that era, and there's some magnificent stuff in there. And he's been very generous in lending that to us. And so that's the one there. My brother and I, James, who's also been a teacher and is a noted cricket historian, in the Cricket Scribes from Sydney. He and I have just done a very small book, 50, 60 pages on an even less known player than any of those we've put together, Billy Makem, who played 2 games for New South Wales in the Golden Age, and we've uncovered a pretty interesting story there too. So yeah, they're the ones sort of on the go at the moment.
How rewarding. I love it. I love your
Yeah,
passion. I
it
love the way
is.
you
It
research
is.
things. I love the way you help Jeff and I with a lot of our story time stuff as well, which is always appreciated. And your commitment to the cause. I don't doubt that we'll end up ranting and raving in a few weeks' time when we get the next instalment of the Australian Cricket Hall of Fame, and some
Yep.
very obvious candidates are overlooked once again. But that'll be a
Yep.
conversation for another time on the pod. We'll wrap up this one today. Pat Rodgers, brilliant. From McDonald Town to Lords, the erratic Syd Emery. Make sure that you invest, if you're listening to this and you love the stories that we tell on the show, invest in cricket literature, buy the books, support the authors so we can keep getting these great tales told. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you, Adam. A huge pleasure. Thank you.